So then we go to the,
we're going to now the second portal.
the guide to the basic
Yes.
toolbox.
Mhm.
Now the glossary, I have another one of those. That I have this whole language that I developed, and people who have followed my work for years and been very supportive, they said, now be sure to put in a glossary so that here, I don't know, should I go through all of this or just this is?
Let me think here. Yeah, let's talk just one or two sentences about each of this, if it's possible.
Well, natural modular building techniques, it comes out of the new tools geometry that I developed. And this is the talking about everything is connected to everything else and how the center, the communication networks that exist. All of the stuff we've been talking about is natural modular building techniques. The most effective minimum state we've talked about, design and nature we've talked about. Structural integrity is, I talk about these communication networks between these integral parts, and integral is a part essential for the completion of the whole. So that structural integrity is when a load is placed, it's communicated over the entire surface or structure has the most structural integrity. So it's really this communication that goes on. And so the more you design using natural modular techniques, the more structural integrity you have, because you can't get more basic than the tetrahedron. If you want to have an inside and an outside, you have to have four sides. Synergetic whole systems, the definition of synergy is behavior of whole systems unprotected by the behavior of the parts. And it'll always be more than the sum of the parts because of this communication between the parts. Self-organizing patterns we've talked about. This is how information gets sticky. Because once you know this pattern, when you come across it again, you know what is all of the dimensions of whatever you're looking at. We talked about geometrical systems, that it's much more realistic to think of it instead of polyhedra. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but for me, having a thickness, that it's always has a thickness. So that gives you to containers, that these geometrical systems are actually containers and they fit inside each other. And that's just their natural state, that they want to connect to each other. And then what is fundamental, we've talked about that. And then the two fundamental job description families, the sphere family, which is I call the all space filling families. When stacked together, they fill up all of the space without any gaps. And then the bubble family, which is the fivefold symmetries, which is like outside protective shells. So like the first egg got the idea for its structure by using the all space filling for the egg yolk and the egg white, and then the outside shell with the fivefold symmetries.
This is very helpful. Thank you.
So there's more details in there. Here's some of the containers. You can see how everything is connected to the outside, and here is the outside corners, the midpoint, and then the center of the square. And then you can see when you start thinking of how everything is connected, you can make these, they look like an egg. And then here's the sphere family, and here's some examples of how they closest pack the cube, the tetra closest packs with the octahedron. So inside every tetrahedron is an octahedron. And then you can see how it just keeps going. And then it's the same arrangement can make the octahedron as well. And then there's the duotet. So you see that this is these 8 corners. These are 2 tetrahedrons that share the same center, but are going in the opposite directions. And so it makes the cube, these 8 corners are the same 8 corners as here. And then this is the truncated rhombic dodecahedron, that all space fills with the cube and the tetra. I just found that amazing because, well, anyway. And then the bubble family. This is the buckyball that we're not going to talk about it because it's one of the truncated, because basically the icosahedron with it sliced off it in 1/3 instead of 1/2 here. So we go to the measurement tools. Oh, now each one of these, I forgot to mention, when you come to the first page, when you click on the menu, you have this to go back to the guide. Oh, we've already gone over all this. Back to the guide. So the sphere tools. Now, Victor Acevedo did the definitive study of these visual, they're just beautiful, of the closest packing of spheres and how they make all of the different, and there's a lot, but here's just the Platonic solids and the vector equilibrium. And you see that it, once again, it's the centers, connecting the centers that make these, and these are all closest packed. Then when we get into circles, there's something I call sphere speak. And so the closest packing of spheres is a fundamental structural constant, that this ability of spheres of the same size to pack together in their most effective minimum manner. So I come up with a origin story.
Yes, please. Yeah.
That instead of having a point that doesn't have a location and a line that has no dimension. So you start with a timeline that has a location on it, and that location remembers the 90-degree angle. And that is the genesis that forms a equator that then needs a scale number. So that's basically what's here. So we start with the BB, and we choose BB to be regulation ping pong ball, which is 2 centimeters. What's great about this is you can change it to anything, whatever you need it to be. And so then you see that Fuller, there was the 3 layers of the spheres. So then you have it, here's the center sphere, and then here's the first layer, the second layer, the third layer. And when you have the third layer, then that gives you the axis of spin. So there's always this spin that's happening, like you saw in the equator here, that it's going, this is going counterclockwise on this one, but on the other hemisphere, the Coriolis effect has an effect on geometrical systems, so it will go in the opposite direction. And then 4 circles can make the vector equilibrium here, as we saw earlier. And then these are all of the mapping, these first burst out in order of these directions that we'll get to later. So we've talked about the closest, I don't think we need to go over this. Now, what's very interesting here, you see the 6BB, sphere speak can also be hexagonal speak, because it's the same thing. It's the connection between the spheres, so that there's all these different ways that you can express that same distance, which is, we're going to say, is the ultimate limit of our center ball, can only go out 12 centimeters. And if it goes out further, then it's just a repeat of that pattern. And where all of this comes from, these directions, is this beautiful symmetry that happens with the 12 balls around the center ball. And you take the center ball out, and the 12 balls makes the icosahedron. Wow. And if you divide it in half, you see that here's that hexagon again. And then the equator of the icosahedron is, you see, it's the half bubble diamond. So we know what all of these dimensions are because it's orange. And you can see here that when I found this out, this is how I came up with the directions. Wow. By this simple So the next thing is how to mass produce these shapes.
Mhm.
So we talked about how the circles can do that. So here is the 60-degree triangle with the 6 BV edge. And then this is the square root of 3. So I call these, this is the where dimension, the vertical,
Mhm.
and then the horizontal is the when dimension.
Mhm.
So I use 6-ply railroad board
Mhm.
for my, and you can never trust them to be 90 degrees.
Mhm.
So what you do is you start at the bottom and draw a line and then do the where, because you know that it's 10.39 and you measure that up. And then you come in, you draw a line and of a when with enough distance so that a protractor can fit there, and you do the 90 degree, because this is really us.
Mhm.
When you put that 90 degrees, then that's saying, okay, this grid that exists everywhere is specific to what we need to have happen. So then you do the when. And then it's just a matter of, for the 60-degree triangle, you connect, you can see that each triangle is, each one of these rectangles here has a 60-degree triangle inside of it. So what you do is you connect one corner to the opposite corner and the second one.
Mhm.
And then it's just a matter of connecting them. And then the more you can, there's, it seems to be a half force that
Mhm.
exists,
Mhm.
that if you then do this line across here in the halfway point
Mhm.
and connect it and do the same pattern again, it self-corrects even more.
Mhm.
So it gets absolutely exact,
Mhm.
so that no matter how messy you are in your original. So then what you do is you always have this list of the where dimensions and the when dimensions.
Mhm.
And so then here's another example. So this is the icosahedron.
Mhm.
So here's the dimensions for that. It's the same
Mhm.
thing. So this is the skeleton for the cube. And so then it's just same thing again, but different. So here you start off, we have 12 centimeters and 8.4. So that's what makes this here, right? And you connect those corners. Then you do that in half, and then you connect the corners there. This one gets a little more complicated, and you have to study this and keep referring back to this until you get your Jenga with it. That's the Portuguese word meaning you have the talent for doing that.
Mhm.
But what it does is it divides this into thirds,
Mhm.
and this becomes very helpful later on. The bubble diamond, it's the same.
Mhm.
I mean, there's now the pentagon,
Mhm.
there's a lot of information here.
Mhm.
I think that, I'm not sure, but I think that this is unique to my work. I haven't seen it anywhere else.
Mhm.
And if anybody's out there that's seen this before, that you make the half of the long axis X, then everything else in the pentagon is relative to that.
Wow. Mhm.
So here it is self-organizing again.
Mhm.
And then, so then you want to put, I mean, there's a lot of detail here. I don't know how
No,
far.
this
you
is
need to-
go. I think we're doing very well. We can continue going through. We don't need to go into too much detail, because what happens is that each of us who is visiting the website will need to spend the time. What we are doing here is to give an overview to make it easy for them. So anything kind of like, for example, anything noteworthy of saying, look, there is some very interesting relations here about Pentagon. Please look at that, and then we can go ahead.
Okay, so you see that the grid for the pentagon is syncopated.
Mhm.
There's big, small, big, because when you draw it, you see that here's a pentagon fits here and the pentagon fits here. I've never seen a mass production of the pentagon, because you need this little cone that takes up a space filler.
Mhm.
And so there's a way, read on the website, you divide the distance, these distances here. Either do half of this one or half of this one on these lines here, and then you get the lines that make all of the cones. And so there's a big cone and a little cone, big cone, little cone. It's the syncopation. And then you just connect, it's just amazing. Here's the 5-pointed star.
Wow.
And this, if you've made mistakes in the Pentagon,
Mhm.
there's a lot of mistakes that are made. This realigns it. And so we still need to do the self-innovation of finding the half, divide the edge in half and find the center. So what you do is you connect to over here, but you don't draw the line all the way through, but you do align it so that you have more cross-referencing. So then you do these lines, and so then you get, and I found that there was nowhere that it explained how do you find the center of a pentagon? And I tried and tried and tried, and eventually I came up with, you take half of the of the long axis again, divide it by the square root of 3.618, and then divide that by the golden ratio, and that will give you this number here, which is this edge here. And then you already know the altitude, so you subtract that so that you have. And then lastly is the Pythagorean theorem, I call the 90-degree triangle formula. This is so helpful in figuring out all sorts of things. And here's, if you need C, here's the formula, you need A. It's pretty self-explanatory. So here is the icosahedron that fits inside the octahedron. So what you know is that this is a 60-degree triangle, right? So this distance we know, it's here. It's the golden ratio to the second power times the edge. So we can make this 90-degree triangle here because we know that whatever this is, half of that distance will be here. And then we know that if we multiply this number times the square root of 3, that will give us this distance. And then we know this distance because we know here is 11, and minus this will give us this. And then we do the Pythagorean theorem, and this will show us that this indeed is the square root of 2, the golden ratio to the second power, 9BB, this 9. And this will prove invaluable. If you're on your own, exploring things,